Hello, everybody. I hope you're having a good Sunday. This month, we're going to be talking about the secrets of creativity and the fact that nothing happens before its time, either in our creative lives or in our spiritual lives. We're going to be looking at the organic nature of the spiritual process and the importance of aligning ourselves with natural law on the path to awakening. Now, when it comes to organic growth, nobody questions the necessity of incremental changes. We all know that without the seed, there can be no sprouting. Without the sprout, no germination. With no germination, no growth or pollination or reproduction, and so forth. These stages are integral and unyielding. It's non negotiable. We need to plant, to water, to wait, to expose to the sun, and then to wait some more before life's greening power brings a seedling to fruition. There's an ancient rhythm to this sequence. Nothing happens before its time. And regardless of how impatient we are, how anxious we are to bring the thing forth, it can't be forced or manipulated without compromising its health or its maturity. And the same holds true for growth in our spiritual lives. We can't will ourselves toward enlightenment. We can't control or rush or skip steps when it comes to recognizing our own true nature. Instead, as gardeners of our own soul, we learn to create the conditions for growth and develop the impatience that it takes before this mysterious intelligence that we can't control. This combination of effort and surrender, desire and unknowing, comes to form the nucleus of our spirituality. As Lao Tzu teaches, the master takes action by letting things take their course. The master takes action by letting things take their course. Do you hear the paradox at the center of that? How wisdom requires action and inaction, it requires determination and waiting. This allowance for paradox, the paradox of natural law, is central and necessary to the speaker's life. When we choose to disregard this law, authenticity and wholeness are bound to suffer. A spiritual perspective on life requires that we pay special attention to the ground that we plant our lives in, the conditions that we create for our own opening, the nutrients we feed, the roots, the intensity of light that we train on our growth. We pay such close attention to these factors because the seeker's path is so very demanding. It's hard for a seed to break through the hard earth as it pushes upward toward the sun. And the same holds true for the enlightened mind. Pushing the wakeful self out of darkness, exposing the divinity at our root, is very hard over the course of a lifetime. We encounter a lot of rocky parts and swampy patches that it's hard to move through. Unfortunately, very little in our materialist culture supports the flowering of the human soul. Wherever we turn, we're reminded how lacking we are, how we need this hungry ghost just to be worthy. Don't wait for anything, just go for it. I had tea this week with Gabor Mate in Costa Rica, who's writing a book about how toxic materialism feeds disease and addiction and trauma. And he was talking about how the inversion of our values causes a kind of perversion of the self. Because focused on materialism, focused always on what we are missing, we become our own saboteurs. And it actually intensifies our suffering and it intensifies our sense of trauma. Now, as a gardener knows her materials and an artist knows the ingredients that are required for his craft, so seekers need to acquaint ourselves with the qualities that support our growth at different points on our journey. What are those qualities that support our growth of this creative spirit, this incremental process of awakening? Here are six of the essential tools that I would like to talk to you about today, that the soul uses for its own unfolding. Suffering or pain, number one. Number two, opportunity. Number three, pollination. Number four, darkness or disillusionment. Number five, patience. And number six, beauty. Okay? Pain, opportunity, pollination, disillusionment, patience, and beauty. It's hard to imagine a seeker's life that doesn't contain some version of all of these things along the way. In truth, everyone alive encounters all of these qualities, but seekers are people who recognize them as opportunities and use them whenever possible to wake ourselves up. Because seekers see our lives as awakening journeys. We see this existence as a process of evolution. And so we learn to appreciate the steps on the way as necessary to that evolution. So let's begin with pain and the longing that pain creates. Very few people embark on a seeker's journey without having first felt a great deal of pain, without having our heart broken somehow, without facing our own solitude, our own mortality. Nobody is likely to experience the desperate longing to be free of pain. In fact, this longing to be free of pain is the first promise of the seeker's path. And although it turns out to be a false promise, it's what gets most of us on the path to awakening. This idea that wisdom or God or practice will somehow lift the suffering from our lives. That was certainly my experience. If my life hadn't fallen apart at a young age, I wouldn't have thrown myself into the Dharma and spiritual seeking and the questions of existence as relentlessly as I did for so many years. Because when reality bites you, you need to question what reality is. What's real and what's not. Pain can lead to awakening, but it takes a choice. It's the choice whether to save our souls from hopelessness by looking through a spiritual perspective, exploring other dimensions of experience, or remain trapped behind the terrified eyes of the physical self. That's our choice. It's a stark choice. For me, the thought of living indefinitely in a kind of panicky terror was just unsustainable. And it's this unsustainability, the inability to live with things as they are, the desperation to get clear, to find wisdom, to find balance, to feel real, to find our way out of the dark wood. That is the fuel that propels us on the journey of self-discovery. So this choice is our most pressing choice as human beings. To live as if life matters or it doesn't. As if we have the tools to awaken, or we're just simply doomed to remain as we are. If it does matter, then we must care enough to understand it, which begins with the mandate to know ourselves beyond the superficial labels that we ordinarily wear in the world. Who is this person who's suffering? Why does she seem like a dream to herself? How does it feel to be alive? How can this person composed of stardust be returning to stardust before your eyes? These are the seeker's questions. How can we live with this impossible contradiction of being a conscious being in a mortal body? How can we do it not only with tolerance, but with gratitude? How can we live with this paradox? These are very important questions to ask. The next item on the list is opportunity. Each of us is given opportunities to learn, to heal, to break free, to tell the truth. Sometimes these opportunities come in the form of people, mentors, guides, who can appear in any form, from strangers to friends to sages to our own children. Sometimes these opportunities come through circumstance that opens possibilities for us to leave our comfort zone, to see things differently, from the perspective of the soul rather than the ego. But again, we often need to be stung before we're drawn to taking these opportunities. Still, they are closer to us than many of us acknowledge. You know those moments when life seems to be tapping you on the shoulder, saying, pay attention, this is important, don't turn away or go to sleep. I think of them as red flag moments, when reality as you know it seems to tear open a little bit, and you see the blue sky beyond the life that you're living. Our evolution as seekers depends on our not overlooking these moments, not missing the exits when we've circled the same disastrous track with some neurosis or pattern endlessly. And life is saying, hey, you, stop, pay attention, take the off ramp. Life is too short to keep going around in circles. So ask yourself, are you missing an opportunity for awakening that's been staring you in the face in your own life? Something that you know would be good for you, or healing, or freeing, educational, that may even scare you a little, but promises to take you places that you have not been. Where do you turn away from your own opportunities in general? We all do it. It's a question of how. How do you lull yourself to sleep? Okay? And then how do you rouse yourself when you catch yourself dozing off? How do you bring yourself back to paying attention to the opportunities that are opening along the way? Next, we come to pollination. Pollination, this is very important because as seekers, we need the contact with wisdom to rather enliven the wisdom in ourselves. We need contact with wisdom to enliven the wisdom in ourselves because we learn through imitation. We learn through osmosis and emotional contagion. We learn through example. We can be pollinated by the simplest things. Wisdom doesn't need to come in any so-called spiritual form or through books or intellectual teaching. We can learn about wisdom watching a homeless vet sitting on a cardboard box on the sidewalk in New York, speaking to a curious child and making it laugh. We can learn as much in that moment about compassion as we can from an Upanishad. There's a wonderful Hasidic story that talks about a guy who used to walk many, many, many miles across the Russian steppe to visit a famous rabbi. And those around him were impressed by his fortitude, by his piety, and asked him what great teaching this rabbi was imparting that got him to walk all that way back and forth. And what he says is, I don't go to hear his teaching. He says, I go to watch how he ties his shoes. I don't go to hear his teaching. I go to watch how he ties his shoes. Of course, that's a metaphor. I go to see how he does the most ordinary things in his life. How does he interact with his world? And I understand that from my own experience with Mother Mira. I've been in the most unspiritual situations imaginable with this very wise woman, and learned as much from the care that she took doing some ordinary thing, walking through an airport or watering a garden, as I've learned in meditation contexts with brilliant and articulate teachers. It comes down to how we perceive. As seekers, we develop a mind that has a kind of sixth sense for things that can teach us or help us or raise us up. Wisdom is a food that we eat like bees find nectar. We move toward the sweetness of wisdom and we take it inside us, and then we carry it forward to the rest of the hive. Without wisdom, we feel ourselves withering. And over time, as we come to realize that we can't flit from master to master like little bees, we learn how to access this sweetness inside ourselves, to pollinate and inspire and fill ourselves up in the ways that we find the most satisfying. We learn on the seeker's path to become self-inspiring. How do you inspire yourself? Ask yourself, where does pollination come from in your own life? What is it that fills you up, takes you home, that raises your spirits, comforts your heart, opens your eyes? Are you familiar enough with the sources of wisdom in your life? These are really strong questions to ask. Next, we come to disillusionment and the dark. We talk about this a lot in the Seekers Forum because it's one of the most important aspects of getting beyond the sentimental claptrap that we're fed in many spiritual traditions, or rather many New Age kind of spiritual traditions that seek to put the darkness out of the picture. Disillusionment, as we said, and pain of some kind, suffering, is part of what puts everyone on the path. When you run into the limits of your own fiction, when you lose something or somebody unimaginable, when you go through some terrible betrayal, or you get a bad diagnosis, or something that gives the lie to your question of reality and who you are and what's possible, something that really shakes up your story. Whatever it takes to wake you up is grace, even when that thing is demonic. And once this initial hit has happened, after the bottom falls out, the illusions are gone, nothing is ever the same again. And often this is followed by a time of darkness, when we seem to have entered a foreign space where we're strangers and nothing is for certain and everything feels scary and we're confused. It's Dante's dark wood. That liminal, benighted time when things seem upside down, and we almost feel as if the earth is trembling underneath our feet. We're so insecure, so precarious does life become. This darkness rarely feels comforting, even though there are periods of solace in obscurity. But it's a necessary enriching and a deepening time of germination and soul retrieval. Because the soul lives in the roots of the self, in the tangled, dark mystery at our root. And allowing ourselves to visit there at certain times, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes through loss, we appreciate what we learn there that we can't learn anywhere else, because that knowledge is integral to the seeker's wisdom. There are certain things that we only learn in the dark. As Theodore Retke said, in a dark time, the eye begins to see. Emerson said it differently. He said, when it is dark enough, you can see the stars. We incubate in the dark like a baby that grows in its mother's womb. And the richness that we find in the dark, like mother's milk, requires that we remain still long enough for the darkness to change us. When we skitter away from the dark, when we avoid our depths, when we avoid the richness and complexity of who we are, we lose immeasurably in terms of self-awareness and how we experience the world. We lose perspective, just the way a painting without any shadow becomes flat and unreal. And that is a temptation in spiritual life, to overemphasize the light. But without the dark, the light would mean nothing. It wouldn't exist, in fact, because spiritual light contains the full spectrum of experience, including the blackest parts. Okay? Spiritual light contains the full spectrum of experience, including the blackest parts. It's not a pastel fantasy. A spirituality without darkness is none at all. And a seeker who hopes to avoid this runs the risk of becoming gullible or fatuous or saccharine. Without gravitas, without the heaviness, the darkness, the dark side of the moon. Spirituality goes all pastel, right? And it can become a kind of nightmare, candy town spirituality, where honest suffering is forbidden and shadows are banished as if by philosophical mandate. You may have come up against teachers like that, and they are not only misleading, but in fact, quite destructive on the path. So if you're involved in a spiritual path that it disallows the dark or doesn't recognize the value of investigating the shadow, I highly recommend that you question this teaching and how it can lead you to a wisdom that isn't dependent on denial. And next, we come to patience. This is often the most challenging ingredient of all in the creative process of self discovery. Allowing things to take their course, abiding with the organic stages of our own efflorescence. The mind wants spirit to obey its rules, to move at its impatient pace. But this is just impossible. The seeker's path follows an eternal rhythm that has nothing to do with calendar time. There's sudden breakthroughs and then long setbacks. There are periods of illumination and then shadowy stretches when nothing at all seems to be happening. We come to see that the quality of our practice isn't about what's happening to us, but the degree to which we say yes to these changes. As Indian sadhu named Sri Anirvan said, quote, "Our understanding of life proceeds at the speed of a bullock cart. The impatient man runs, greedy for conquest. Our mind has wings and can soar over difficulties, but we have a fine pair of feet to keep us in touch with Mother Earth. We have to plow through it and often stumble over roots and stones. Then the time comes for sowing. Remember that all things in life are in accord with a very slow rhythm, like the changing of the seasons and the coursings of the stars. This work in depth is done in darkness without sound." Beautiful. Remember that all things in life are in accord with a very slow rhythm, like the changing of seasons and the coursing of stars. This primordial rhythm underscores our existence. And as we learn to follow this rhythm, as we allow ourselves to be guided by life, to trust the seasons and the natural stages of creative growth, we attune to that wisdom that's beyond the mind, that knows much more than we think we do, but bides its time until we turn to it and pay attention. So ask yourself, is patience part of your own spiritual practice? Do you recognize the value of delayed gratification? Can you step aside and reserve judgment and continue to show up, to do your practice, to walk your talk when momentum flags and you think that you've stalled? What comes up in you when you fear that God has forgotten about you and doubt that you're connected to the source? Can you be patient when hope disappears and recognize patience as your precious ally? Great stuff to look at. And finally, we come to beauty as the final item on our list. Without a sense of the beautiful, it's hard to value truth, love, or goodness because they are all inseparable. Tagore wrote, "Beauty is reality seen through the eyes of love." Beauty is reality seen through the eyes of love, meaning that for the seeker, the intention is to find the beauty in all things, even the most difficult. Understanding that we live in a beautiful world, not a pretty one. A beautiful world, but it's not pretty. To appreciate the ugly beauties of the world, in fact, is critical. It's critical to being a spiritual adult. When we drop our judgment about how things are supposed to look, we can, in fact, find the exquisite in the darkest places. I know I've told you this story before, but I find it so moving. The first time I went to India, there was a guy with no legs who used to beg on the sidewalk outside the hostel where I was staying. And his body was completely twisted. He obviously was as poor as dirt. And he would sit on this blanket, just beaming at people as they walked past, blessing people. And if you actually dropped a rupee into his bowl, he was overjoyed. And the feeling of godliness in this man was so contagious that you felt it for the rest of the day. Now, This isn't to romanticize poverty. It's to acknowledge that even within affliction, even in a container that most people would see as hideous, there is a penetrating beauty if you look at it through sacred eyes, if you look at it through the eyes of God. Our ability to find beauty in adversity is connected, of course, to our ability to create meaning, which is also central to the seeker's path. A need to find significance, to matter, to value, to acknowledge that in spite of the travails of the human condition, this experience is astounding. So, taken together, these six qualities pain, opportunity, pollination, darkness, patience, and beauty form the basis of our spiritual search. They're integral parts of what keep us ticking, keep us moving, keep us inspired on the path. And it's very helpful to reflect on this in the throes of our lives when we feel lost or we believe that we're lost or if we've been forgotten. Remember patience, remember the dark. Remember to see difficult things as well as opportunities, not just the manifestations of an adversarial universe. Now, I'd like you to take 3 minutes. We're going to do a short writing exercise. So if you don't mind, just take out a piece of paper, or if you'd like to type on something, that's absolutely fine with us. But I'd like you now, please, just to take 3 minutes to describe one thing that you've learned from dark times in your life that you couldn't have learned in any other way. Okay? One thing you've learned from dark times in your life, moments of loss, that you could not have learned in any other way. We'll take 3 minutes to do that, please, and then we'll come back together.